You're listening to Sirens, a true crime podcast, brought to you by the Sirens Network. This podcast contains explicit content, so listener discretion is advised. The opinions expressed on this podcast are solely the views of the hosts and do not reflect the views of affiliates, associates, or sponsors of this podcast. This is Sirens, a true crime podcast.
We are still technically on hiatus, and so we are not bringing you really any of our own cases right now. Again, we have so much going on. I myself am starting a new podcast, which is an RPG tabletop podcast called I Crit You Not. That is going to be out in hopefully at least season 1 in the next month. It's a live gameplay with my husband, Rick Rollins, and some of the guests that you've heard here on the show. So we're going to have Jean Grey playing with us. We will have Simon Vaughn. We will have Bill Shackelford and some new people. We're going to try to rotate through each session slash season, which will be a new tabletop RPG every time that we play. Might have 3, 4, 5, 6 episodes to each session, but what you're hearing will take place all in one session. So hopefully you'll like that. Also, Mandy and I are writing some fiction books. We are also working on another true crime book. We are still waiting on this documentary to get rolling, and for the Sins of the South book that we did. So there is a lot. I know I'm forgetting just so much to tell you. But because of that, the only thing that we're really doing right now is our author interviews for Raven's Reviews, because that really does not take too much of my time. I'm an author myself, an audiobook narrator. It's really easy for me to just jump in with these other authors and ask them questions. We will come back at some point with actual true crime cases. I just don't know when that's going to be. It may not be until 2025. So hang out with us, check out the Ravens reviews that we have coming at you. And I will also maybe have some more of these feed drops in the meantime. So what we're doing today is I have a feed drop. A feed drop is where I simply present to you another podcast's full episode. So today I have a feed drop from the Unforbidden Truth podcast. And while they are true crime, they are kind of niche. So you guys, I thought you might be interested in checking out the work over at Unforbidden Truth, because what they do there is, instead of telling you the full case here like we do, they go and interview usually killers who are currently serving time behind bars. And so you really need to brush up on the case before you listen to these interviews. But then you can go and listen to, these interviews basically straight from the horse's mouth, and see what these killers have to say about their crimes or about why they were committed. And so today I have an episode that deals with a man who was convicted here in Oklahoma for murder and rape. His name is Anthony Sanchez Jr. I'm going to tell you, because he does not give you case details, and I know that's what you're here for. I am going to go ahead and tell you the case details, and then we are going to let you listen to the interview that Unforbidden Truth did with Anthony. Okay, so here we go. Juli Busken was a 21-year-old ballerina from Benton, Arkansas. She had just finished her final semester at the University of Oklahoma when she was abducted from her apartment in Norman on December 20th, 1996. Her body was found near Lake Stanley Draper that evening. Authorities said that she had been bound, raped, and shot in the back of the head. After 8 years of few leads, police searched the then 25-year-old Anthony Sanchez Jr., a member of the Choctaw Nation, in 2004. Investigators said a DNA sample taken from him when he was imprisoned for burglary had matched DNA recovered from the pink leotard found on Busken's body. 2 years on, he was convicted and sentenced to die. He always maintained he did not kill Busken, telling Newsweek from prison that he was convicted, quote, on pure circumstantial evidence. Anthony Sanchez was tried by jury and found guilty of Count 1, murder in the first degree, Count 2, rape in the first degree, and Count 3, forcible sodomy in Cleveland County District Court. The jury found all 3 aggravating circumstances, and the Honorable William C. Hetherington, district judge who presided over the trial, pronounced the judgment and sentence on June 6, 2006, sentenced Anthony to die. Juli Busken lived in the Dublin West Apartments on East Lindsay Street in Norman, near the University of Oklahoma, where she studied ballet. In the winter of 1996, she had completed her course requirements for graduation. Miss Busken planned to return to her parents' home in Arkansas and enroll in graduate school. She had packed most of her belongings earlier in the week. Her parents were to arrive in Norman on December 20th, 1996, to collect her things in a U-Haul trailer and accompany her back to Arkansas. Miss Busken spent the evening of December 19th, 1996, visiting with her college friends, exchanging Christmas gifts and goodbyes. She had planned to give her friend, Megan Schreck, a ride to Will Rogers Airport early on the morning of December 20th. So the two decided to stay up all night long. Miss Busken and Miss Schreck left Schreck's apartment on West Lindsay Street and ate at the Kettle around 2 a.m., returning to the apartment around 3 a.m. Miss Busken fell asleep for a short while, and they headed toward the airport around 4:30 a.m. Around 5 a.m. on December 20th, 1996, Miss Busken dropped off her friend. She left Will Rogers Airport driving her Red Eagle Summit, which bore an Arkansas license plate. Around 5 a.m., back at the Dublin West Apartments where Miss Busken lived, at least 3 people heard a woman scream in terror. William Alves, a Norman police officer, lived at the apartments and worked off-duty security. When Alves heard the screaming, he went outside and looked, but saw nothing. Jackie Evans lived across the parking lot from Miss Busken. She also heard a woman scream and a man saying, "Just shut up and get in the car." Miss Evans described a car door opening, then closing, the sound of footsteps, and another car door opening and closing. She then heard the car start and quickly drive away. Norman police officer Kyle Harris arrived at the apartments around 5:51 a.m. in response to the 911 call reporting the screams. He could find nothing suspicious at the apartment. Ryan James worked with Juli Busken at the OU golf course. They were close friends. Mr. James had plans to meet Miss Busken for lunch on December 20th, 1996. When he arrived at Miss Busken's apartment around 11 a.m., he noticed her car was gone. Mr. James returned to work at the golf course. He checked Miss Busken's apartment again when he got off work around 4 p.m., hoping that they would have dinner together, but she still had not returned home. Mr. James was worried about Miss Busken and checked with his grandparents to see if she had called or visited their home, as she often did. She had not been there either. Mr. James and his grandfather searched for Miss Busken, even driving to Will Rogers Airport trying to find her. Mr. James' grandfather knew OU Police Chief Joe Lester. They contacted Chief Lester early in the evening of November 20th, 1996, to report that Miss Busken was missing. Juli Busken never returned. Randy Langford saw something unusual lying along the shoreline of Lake Stanley Draper around noon on December 20th, 1996. He was unsure that it was a human body, and went ahead and went home. Later, he returned to the lake with his wife after dark that evening, as the sighting had been troubling his mind. Shining their lights down onto the shore, the Langfords believed they saw a body lying at the water's edge. They reported the matter to a nearby police station, and police soon descended on the scene to investigate the body and preserve evidence. From the physical description in a missing persons report originating from Norman concerning a female student, Oklahoma City police quickly deduced they had found the body of Juli Busken. Chief Joe Lester gave the awful news to Bud and Mary Busken, who had arrived in Norman just a short time before, that the search for their missing daughter was over. A long search for Juli Busken's killer had only begun. Miss Busken's body was clothed when she was found, but her jeans were unbuttoned and unzipped, and her underwear was partially rolled down her thighs. She was lying face down, her head and shoulders in the shallow, freezing water, her hands bound behind her with black shoelaces. Her prized opal and diamond ring, a gift from her parents, was missing from her finger and has never been found. Crime scene technicians recovered a possible hair from her stomach when she was turned over. Investigators could see Miss Busken had been shot in the head. At the autopsy, the medical examiner observed that Miss Busken's nose and forehead were scratched and bruised, and blood was in her left nostril. Several oval-shaped bruises were seen on her inner thigh. She was also bruised in a small area near the labia, and a small scrape was found in the perineal region. Fecal matter was smeared in the area of the buttocks. The medical examiner preserved swabs of her oral, vaginal, and anal cavities for DNA analysis. The death wound was a contact shot to the rear of the skull, traversing the brain from back to front, left to right, and slightly upward before coming to rest in the frontal area of the skull, causing multiple fractures and a catastrophic brain injury. The medical examiner recovered the fatal bullet, later identified by caliber as .22 long rifle. Subsequent ballistic analysis shows the barrel of the weapon that fired the fatal bullet marked it with 16 lands and grooves and a right-hand twist. Police recovered several items of evidence from the crime scene at Lake Stanley Draper, including a discarded pink leotard bearing the initials JB, wiped with apparent fecal matter. A tissue smeared with apparent fecal matter was also recovered. Investigators could see 2 sets of footprints leading to the water's edge, and 1 set leading away, which they marked and photographed. From multiple cuttings of Miss Busken's garments, the anal swab obtained from the body, and a pair of pajama bottoms recovered from Miss Busken's vehicle, criminalists later identified the presence of human spermatozoa. Criminalists eventually used the genetic material recovered from Miss Busken's panties and the pink JB leotard to develop the DNA profile of an unknown suspect. Sightings of Juli Busken and her abductor, reported by other witnesses, narrowed the time frame within which Miss Busken was kidnapped and killed. Janice Keller saw a small red car like Juli Busken's near Lake Stanley Draper between 6:45 and 7 a.m. on the morning of December 20th, 1996. Keller saw a young man she approximated between age 25 and 30 driving the car. In the passenger seat, she could see a woman who seemed somewhat younger, with her hair pulled back and prominent bangs in front. In the young woman's remarkably large eyes and facial expression, Miss Keller sensed the presence of fear. She also noticed how the male driver looked angry. Miss Keller contacted police about her sighting after hearing of the Juli Busken murder, but was not interviewed until 2 years later. She provided police with her own profile drawing of the man she saw and helped develop a composite drawing admitted at trial. Another witness, David Kill, was on his way home from a night shift at Tinker Air Force Base, driving back toward Norman that morning around 7:10 to 7:15 a.m. He encountered a red compact car bearing an Arkansas license plate driving away from Lake Stanley Draper. A male driver alone in the car cut off Mr. Kill in traffic and seemed to not notice he was there. Mr. Kill was angered by the man's driving and chased the car back to Norman at high speed. He testified that despite his aggressive pursuit of the car, the driver still seemed oblivious to him. He parted with the red car when he turned on Alameda Street, but watched it continue south toward Lindsay Street. After seeing a news report about Miss Busken's disappearance, Mr. Kill realized he had seen her car and called Oklahoma City police. Kill also gave a physical description of the driver he had seen and helped develop a composite drawing, also admitted as evidence. December 20th, 1996, OU police found Juli Busken's Red Eagle Summit parked just across the street from the Dublin West Apartments, where the screams were heard early that morning. A pair of pajama bottoms recovered from the car was stained with semen, from which criminalists later isolated a sperm fraction and developed a partial DNA profile. Police also photographed an impression of a person's buttocks imprinted on the exterior panel of the car. A cell phone, a CD player, and a radar detector were missing from the car. Records of activity from Miss Busken's missing cell phone showed that a call was placed on December 21st, 1996, to a number investigators later associated with Anthony Sanchez's former girlfriend. Calls were also placed from Miss Busken's phone after her murder to 2 numbers, similar to phone numbers later associated with friends of Anthony Sanchez. In the year 2000, the state of Oklahoma charged an unknown suspect with the kidnapping, sexual assault, and murder of Juli Busken, identifying the defendant only by the DNA profile developed from crime scene evidence. In the months and years after her murder, investigators contacted and interviewed virtually every person they could find who had ever known or might have had reason or opportunity to harm Juli Busken. Detectives asked for DNA samples from almost 200 people to compare against the suspect DNA profile and other serology evidence. Throughout the entire investigation, prior to July 2004, Anthony Castillo Sanchez was never interviewed, contacted, or considered a suspect in Miss Busken's murder. Miss Busken's closest friends testified at trial they had never seen or heard of Anthony Sanchez as a friend or acquaintance of Juli. Sanchez went to prison in 2002 for a second-degree burglary committed the previous year. While serving his sentence, the Oklahoma Department of Corrections obtained his tissue samples for DNA analysis, as required by statute. The Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation, OSBI, then developed a DNA profile from the sample and placed it onto the OSBI's Combined DNA Index System, CODIS. In July 2004, OSBI criminalist Ken Neeland notified a cold case detective in the Oklahoma City Police Department that Anthony Sanchez's DNA profile had generated a hit on the unknown DNA profile associated with the Juli Busken murder. Police obtained a search warrant and a new sample of Sanchez's DNA for further comparisons. The state presented evidence at trial that Sanchez's DNA matched the DNA profile generated from the sperm cell fraction isolated on Miss Busken's panties, and also matched the sperm cell fraction isolated from the stained pink leotard discarded at the crime scene. The matches corresponded to Sanchez's known DNA at all 16 genetic loci tested. The state's DNA expert characterized the probability of a random DNA match on the Busken evidence with an unrelated individual other than Sanchez as 1 in 200.7 trillion Caucasians, 1 in 20.45 quadrillion African Americans, and 1 in 94.07 trillion Southwest Hispanics. Sanchez also could not be excluded as the donor of a DNA mixture isolated from epithelial cell fractions on the panties and leotard. DNA comparisons on the spermatozoa recovered from the anal swab and the pajama bottoms from the car were inconclusive. Sanchez's former girlfriend, Kristen Setzer, testified that between 1994 and 1996, she lived with Sanchez in a residence on Drake Drive in Southwest Norman, about 1 mile from Juli Busken's apartment. Miss Setzer and appellant had a child in May of 1997, but later separated. When police interviewed Miss Setzer years after the Busken murder, she described an incident when shots were fired within the Drake Drive residence. Only Sanchez and his stepfather were in the room when shots were fired. Miss Setzer told police she later saw bullet holes in the east wall of the room. Police obtained a search warrant for the residence in 2004 and dismantled the walls looking for evidence of these shots and any potential projectiles. They located a linear defect in the lumber of a wall stud consistent with a bullet strike, but were unable to find a projectile. Police also found a piece of foam which bore marks consistent with a bullet strike. After police collected these items and left the scene, the owner of the residence vacuumed the area of the wall, which police had dismantled. Searching the contents of the vacuum bag later in his garage, he located an item later identified as a .22 long rifle projectile. The Drake Drive bullet was marked ballistically with 16 lands and grooves and a right-hand twist, and thus shared the same caliber and general barrel markings as the .22 bullet that killed Juli Busken. Testimony from one of Sanchez's friends established that Sanchez was in possession of a small .25 caliber pistol in 1994 and 1995. The state impeached this witness with his prior statement that the pistol could have been a .22 or a .25 caliber. Attempts to positively identify the Drake Drive bullet and the bullet recovered from Juli Busken as being fired from the same weapon were proved inconclusive. Sanchez called no witnesses in the first stage of trial and did not testify. Sanchez was found guilty. Later, an attorney for Sanchez asked the Oklahoma Court of Criminal Appeals for an evidentiary hearing alleging that Sanchez's father was the actual killer. In the court filing, Mark Barrett wrote that Charlotte Beatty first heard Thomas Glenn Sanchez, Sr., confess in July of 2020, but was too afraid of him to come forward while he was alive. The filing noted that neither of the two eyewitnesses identified Sanchez Jr. as the perpetrator during their testimonies, and that evidence taken from Busken's vehicle, including 49 fingerprints and hair, were not matched to Sanchez Jr. Importantly, the filing said a police sketch crafted with the help of a witness who saw Busken and the perpetrator appears to match a photo of Sanchez Sr. taken in 1996. The court stayed execution of the judgment and sentence on June 14, 2006. Charlotte Beatty told Newsweek that Thomas Glenn Sanchez, Sr. repeatedly admitted to killing Juli Busken before his death. Quote, "He told me about it a few times, saying that he had to hogtie her because she squealed. He said after he finished the job with her, he just shot her in the head." End quote. She feared the same fate would befall her if she ever told anyone. Quote, "I was afraid because he said that he could end up doing to me what he did to Juli Busken." End quote. Beatty met Sanchez Sr. in meat cutting school in the early 1990s, but they lost touch when she moved. In 1994, she said he contacted her and told her that he had divorced. Quote, "I started going around with him, and we just went places, and we had a nice time." End quote. The following year, she gave birth to their son. Just months earlier, he had met another woman who would go on to become his third wife. But he, quote, "kept on coming back and forth," end quote, Beatty said, adding that he often mooched off her to pay for his drinking. And over the years, he, quote, "started getting more hateful," she said. He took his anger out on her, describing in graphic terms the sexual assaults he subjected her to. Quote, "If I screamed, he'd go further," she said. Beatty said Sanchez Sr. first mentioned Busken's killing to her several years prior to the interview with Newsweek. But after mentioning her the first time, he then kept on bringing her up. Quote, he'd say, "I'll hunt you down and kill you if you say something." That's how he was whenever he was telling me about Juli Busken. There were a few times he talked about it sober. He just kept on talking about it. End quote. Sanchez Sr. was diagnosed with cancer in February 2022. A lump on his neck grew to the size of a baseball by the end, meaning he couldn't talk much, Beatty said. Quote, "He never expressed remorse. He just kept on saying that at least Anthony's a man. I'd say, why would you want him to suffer for it? He said, well, because he's young and he can handle it." End quote. David Ballard, an investigator hired by Sanchez Jr.'s attorney and death penalty opponents to examine the case, said he found that many who knew Sanchez Sr. described him as paranoid and that most who knew him were affected by his abuse. That includes Kathy Hodge, who married Sanchez Sr. in 1980 when Anthony was a little over a year old. She spoke of the physical abuse she regularly suffered over the course of the 14-year marriage. Quote, "It started off just a slap here, slap there, and it got worse and worse. During the week, everything was normal. It was usually on the weekends when he'd start drinking and he would get to a certain point and then he got real abusive." End quote. Her former husband pulled a gun on her numerous times, she said, but she was not sexually abused. She recalled on one occasion after a night out that he beat her in the car. Quote, "I had 2 black eyes swelled shut," she said. While Hodge is convinced the man she considers her son is innocent, she hesitates to definitively point the finger at his father. Quote, "I know he was abusive, but I wouldn't have never seen him as a murderer. But I don't know if he changed after I left." End quote. But what many who knew the father and son agree on is that the police sketch looks a lot like Sanchez Sr. and nothing like Anthony. The sketch shows an apparently older man with hollowed cheekbones and shoulder-length hair. Sanchez Jr. was a teenager with hair down to his back at the time of Busken's killing. Hodge said, quote, "It did resemble Glenn. It didn't look anything like Anthony. I believe in his innocence 100%. There's too many things that prove he didn't do it." End quote. Anthony does not want to believe his father committed the crime he paid the ultimate price for, but he did say that the sketch does resemble his father. Quote, "I have very mixed emotions about it. It does look like my father. It does," he said. The OSBI in February of 2023 compared Sanchez's DNA to that recovered from Busken's leotard. The Oklahoman reported and concluded the DNA did not match that from Busken's leotard. The state's attorney said the new tests were conducted, quote, "in an effort to fully and unequivocally debunk the new claim." Ballard, the investigator hired by Anthony's lawyer, questioned the DNA handling and profiling, a technology in its infancy at the time that was done in the case. The testing and results were, quote, "questionable at best," end quote. He said it needs to be redone. A spokesperson for the Attorney General's office said there was no evidence to suggest the DNA was not properly collected or stored. The spokesperson said the profile obtained from Busken's leotard by the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation in 2000 matched, quote, "exactly," end quote, to a DNA profile separately obtained by Oklahoma City Police. Sanchez Sr. was excluded, but the testing found that it was highly likely to belong to the biological father of the attacker. Fingerprints, skin cells, and hair found in Busken's vehicle should be tested against Sanchez Sr. Anthony's attorneys and advocates also dispute the state's assertion that a shoe print at the crime scene was connected to him. They never found the shoe, but an ex-girlfriend told authorities that he owned a similar pair. The shoe print was of a size 9, said Ballard, president of Valor Investigations, LLC of Norman. Quote, "If they checked my foot, they would have known I was a size 11.5, Anthony said. "And it's a mass-produced shoe," Ballard added. Quote, "There's so many unanswered questions, and a lot of the evidence was inconclusive, but labeled as this matches," end quote. Ballard said a detective had looked at Sanchez Sr. as a more plausible suspect early on in the investigation, but was, quote, "shut down." And the court rejected the claim that Sanchez Sr. was the real killer, with Judge David Lewis writing in a ruling, quote, "Indeed, considering the remaining evidence, even if Glenn Sanchez had confessed his guilt on the witness stand under oath at Anthony Sanchez's murder trial, no reasonable fact finder would have acquitted Anthony Sanchez of killing Juli Busken," end quote. In a statement to Newsweek, Oklahoma Attorney General Drummond said the evidence is, quote, "overwhelming that Anthony Sanchez brutally raped and murdered Juli Busken. Instead of expressing remorse, he made the cowardly decision to try blaming the crime on his deceased father, a ludicrous allegation thoroughly discredited by DNA analysis. What makes this claim all the more despicable is that it makes a mockery of how advances in DNA evidence have exonerated wrongly convicted individuals in recent years. Just as DNA evidence has helped clear the innocent, it can also conclusively show guilt. Anthony Sanchez is guilty beyond any conceivable doubt, and I will ensure justice is served," end quote. Advocates for Anthony Sanchez have questioned the DNA evidence used to secure the conviction, saying it was mishandled and manipulated, and argue other evidence, including ballistic evidence, was not credibly connected to Sanchez Jr. Anthony was a boy, quote, "who had to raise himself," end quote, Beatty recalled. She remembers his father as an alcoholic, an opioid abuser, with a short temper who physically and sexually abused her for years. He took his own life on her front porch on April 24th, 2022. He was 68 years old. Speaking to Newsweek from the Oklahoma State Penitentiary in McAlester, Sanchez maintained his innocence. I was convicted of murdering Juli Busken on pure circumstantial evidence, he said. There was no physical evidence at all, end quote. So now that you know this case a little bit better, let me introduce you to the Unforbidden Truth podcast, and you can hear for yourself the testimony that Anthony Sanchez gives in his interview with Unforbidden Truth.
Unforbidden
Truth.
Unforbidden
Truth. Podcast.
Unforbidden
Truth.
Podcast.
Hello, this is a free call from
Anthony.
an incarcerated individual at Oklahoma State Penitentiary. This call is not private. It will be recorded and may be monitored. If you believe this should be a private call, please hang up and follow facility instructions to register this number as a private number. This call is not private. This call will be recorded and may be monitored. If this call is to an attorney, the attorney should hang up and dial 405-425-2515 to register this number as a private attorney number.
My name is Anthony Sanchez, DOC number 275098. I am incarcerated at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary in McAlester, Oklahoma, on death row.
Can you tell me what your relationship was like with your mother and father growing up?
Personally, I thought I had a wonderful relationship with my father. My mother, not so much. My stepmother, I have an awesome relationship with. I really don't know my biological mother like that. I was not raised with her.
Was there any abuse ever in the household growing up?
There were some things that I'm not proud of, and I mean, it depends it depends what you consider abuse. I mean, I was a kid. I got spankings when I acted up. You know, I mean, I guess I could say I didn't get a spanking that I didn't deserve, I guess.
So there was no beatings or any violence toward your stepmother or yourself in the house?
I mean, yeah, there was.
How often would you say that happened?
It just whenever it drinks. Just people get stupid when they drink.
Oh, so they were drinkers? Do you have any fond memories of your father?
I do. He was there for all my football games. We played baseball, wrestled. I mean, he was always there for me.
Just anything in general, like anything that might have been traumatic or anything that sticks with you to this day that might have been more negative than positive?
No, not really.
I know we don't have much time, so let's talk about the crime that you're in prison for, that you're on death row for that matter. I know you've always maintained your innocence, so I must ask you, how did you wind up being involved with this case, let alone convicted of this crime and sentenced to death?
I was convicted on pure circumstantial evidence. No physical evidence at all. No hard evidence, just pure speculation and accusations. From the start of my trial, I tried to relieve my trial attorneys. They attended the same church as the victim, Miss Juli Busken. My trial judge also attended the same church as the victim, Miss Juli Busken. I was forced to wear leg shackles and handcuffs throughout my whole trial. The jury was all white. I'm Indian and Mexican. So, and I know that my family's not the only Hispanic Indian people in Norman, Oklahoma. I mean, that's not a fair trial at all. My trial lawyers never talked to any of my 7 alibis or called any of them to testify. My trial lawyers never verified where I lived or went to school. My trial lawyers never talked to my father or my mother or any of my family and friends. I mean, I'm innocent. I said I was innocent from the beginning of this. I had no part of it. I don't know nothing about it. And I've had these like, how do you have trial lawyers that attend the same church as the victim represent you? It's not like I'm in a little bitty town. It's Norman, Oklahoma. It's a good sized town. It's not like everybody knows everybody. And I mean, it's just, there's a whole bunch of different things that, I mean, I can prove to you that the district attorney lied during my trial. I can also, what I think proves my innocence to you. Proof that the district attorney lied. The district attorney said in trial that I lived at 813 Drake Drive with Kristen Martin and my father and mother in December of 96 when Juli Busken was murdered. District attorney lied because if we got evicted in 1995, and if my trial lawyers would have talked to my family and done a little homework, they would have known that. And they would have known that I lived in Moore, Oklahoma, not Norman. And I went to Moore High School in December of 96 when Miss Busken was murdered. The district attorney put on a State's Exhibit 88, which is a picture of the killer's footprint with a tape measure. And he said at the trial it's a size 9. The district attorney lied because if you look at the tape measure marked toe to heel, it's a hair under 10 inches. And on a Brannock device, 10 inches is a 7.5 to 8 shoe size, not size 9. If my lawyers would have paid attention, they would have caught that. But even more, if my lawyers would have even cared, they would have known I wear a 11.5 wide, not a size 8, not a size 9, not a size 10. The killer's footprint, according to the district attorney, is a size 9. I wear 11.5. I can't shrink my foot. I've worn 11.5 since I was probably 11 or 12 years old. How about you? Has your shoes shrunk? You probably had the same size since you was a teenager too.
Right.
But nobody cared to look at that. Nobody even bothered to check it out. They did whatever they wanted to do. And then district attorney kept saying in trial that I used Miss Juli Busken's cell phone to call my ex-girlfriend. My ex-girlfriend has texted my mother, and on her text, she says that was not her phone number in December 1996, that they're lying. And I know for a fact that my mom has that on her cell phone. And I mean, if my lawyers would have just talked to my family, they would have known that too. And then the district attorney agreed an order testing the DNA evidence in 2005. And they stated that the DNA would be completely consumed on this test. And they sent the DNA to Relia Gene Technology Incorporation in New Orleans. So to me, how could the DNA even been tested in there if New Orleans was underwater because of Hurricane Katrina? How are they saying that they got tested there if it was underwater? They couldn't have been. So that's 4 valid lies told by the district attorney. Now, proof of my innocence, there's 49 fingerprints. 49. None of them belong to me. Not one of them. The eyewitness, Kay Merriman, she drew the sketch, and I was told she drew Juli Busken, and she drew Juli Busken to the T. So if her sketch looked just like Juli Busken, she wouldn't be that far off from the killer if she drew the killer too. And she did draw the killer. And it looks like a way older man. And I had just turned 18 at the time. So she couldn't have been that far off. Nobody ever bothered to check that. And when she was asked in trial if the killer was in the room to identify him, she didn't identify me. And if you look at State's Exhibit 88, and real good, it's got a tape measure next to it. And you take my bare foot, no sock, no shoe, and you put it on an acetate paper, my foot completely engulfs the State's Exhibit, proving I couldn't be the killer. And if you look at the medical examiner's autopsy report and the State's Exhibit 88, you can tell it's a left-handed shooter. The entrance is to the lower left side of the head. The killer's feet prints are to the right side of Miss Juli Busken. I'm right-handed. This proves I couldn't shoot a gun like that. This report shows the bullets going from left to upper right. So that's definitely a left-handed person. Nobody checked that. The autopsy report also shows chronic inflammatory cells to her libido and her anal, which are signs of healing. Dead people don't heal. The autopsy also shows no signs of any brutal rape of any kind. No murder weapon has ever been found or linked to me or any of my family members. No ballistics has ever been matched or linked to me or any of my family members. And back then, I had hair to the middle of my back. None of my hair was found. And anybody that has long hair knows your hair is everywhere. And my hair was everywhere except the crime scene. And again, I lived on West Franklin Road in Moore, Oklahoma in 1996 and went to Moore High School. Proof that I didn't live on 813 Drake Drive in Norman. No one ever bothered to look up my cell phone records to compare it to the state's Exhibit 141. And no one ever called my ex-girlfriend to testify. Why will my lawyers not even just do a little bit of this? I mean, if they would have just asked. And, you know, the DNA was taken in 1996 while Joyce Gilchrist and her team was still working. In fact, Joyce Gilchrist did not get fired until well after my trial, proving something was wrong with the DNA in my case all the way around. And if you look at Curtis McCartney's case, it almost mirrors each other. And again, that's 10 ways to prove that I'm innocent. I was convicted on pure speculation and accusations. No hard evidence at all. And Mr. Dodge, I appreciate you talking to me and trying to get my story out there, because I am innocent. And it's awful being in this place.
After you were convicted of this crime and received your sentence, which was death, do you remember what your reaction was then?
I was devastated. I was in shock. I was like, there's no way. How could you kill somebody on pure circumstantial evidence and somebody who said that they were innocent from the beginning? It doesn't make no sense. This is America. This isn't no third world country. Where was my representation at? Where were my lawyers? How come they did not? The questions that I just put forth to you, I answered for you. My footprints, the DNA, they did whatever they wanted to. They didn't even let my family in the courtroom. So it was like I was standing in front of a whole lot of, I don't know how to say it. It was just like a bunch of white people. There was no brown people in there whatsoever. It was scary. I was terrified. And they said death. Man, everything in me just, I don't know, man. It's just scary. It's still scary. It's hard.
So what's your experience been like on death row?
You learn a lot about law that you never wanted to learn. It's a scary experience. I wouldn't wish this place on my worst enemy. This place is awful. There's absolutely nothing good about prison at all. At the end of the day, prison's not the worst thing. There's nothing worse about this prison than losing out on the life of my children. I had to watch my children grow up behind bars, actually the door from death row. That's the worst. That's the absolutely worst. You don't know if your kid's hurt. You don't know if your kid has clothes or food, and it's awful. That's the most worst thing that's happened.
How do you deal with that?
A lot of prayer, a lot of prayer. It's a very difficult, that's the most difficult thing that I've ever had to experience in my life. And it's still going on to this day. I mean, there's not a day that goes by that I don't think of any one of my children. And I want to be there for them, but I can't. And I have a good spiritual advisor who helps me. I mean, they talk to me quite a bit about it, and they pray with me, and I get it off my chest, like what I want to say, but at the same time, this is awful. This is, like I said, I wouldn't wish this on my worst enemy. Being away from your kids is the worst. It is.
So you have quite the support here on the streets. How does it feel to have people rallying behind you, believing in your innocence enough to advocate for you?
It feels wonderful because I had lost all hope. I had sat here and screamed that I'm innocent till I was blue in the face and nobody listened. This spiritual man came out of nowhere and did his own homework and looked into my case and looked for himself at how these lawyers just kept doing their own thing and not actually telling the truth, and actually not fighting for me. And he seen, but he also seen where I had tried to fire them before he ever came along, where I had trouble with these lawyers, where they wouldn't put just like I told you, they wouldn't put what I thought proved my innocence forward. They kept doing some other things that I didn't approve of, but I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know what I'm supposed to do. Nobody knows what they're supposed to do down here. So we're just supposed to listen to our lawyers, and that's that. Because there's nobody here to explain things. And I think each and everybody that's out there that's supporting me, I do. I'm so grateful. I'm very appreciative of all of the support that I have. It's wonderful.
I have a lot of regrets. I wish I would have stayed in school. I wish I would have learned law. Like I said, being in prison, it changes you all the way around. And it makes you wish that you would have paid attention in school more. There's a lot of things that, I wish I would have listened to my mom more. Wish I would have listened to my dad more.
Is there anything that you'd like the public to know about you or this case in general?
Yeah, I do. It's a tragedy that Juli Busken lost her life. If I killed Juli Busken, why would I stay around doing my time and paying my debt for what I'd already done? Why would I risk it knowing that I would be rearrested and do serious time unless I truly didn't kill Juli Busken? And in fact, I'm innocent, like I've been saying this whole time. It's true. I am innocent. And it's disappointing to know that somebody had lied on me. It's unfortunate that someone has decided to lie about me and my case. And I'm grateful that the good people have ran to the press and blew the whistle on all of those liars and forced their accountability through the press. So the whole world knows that they're lying on me and that circumstantial evidence should not be or put somebody on death row. You should not be allowed to kill somebody on pure circumstantial evidence. And it's crazy. And this is very stressful and hard. It's real stressful. And it makes poor people very vulnerable to whatever these lawyers and these judges would want to do. It's like they can choreograph their own motions without any input or consequences. But at the end of the day, I really want to thank the countless people for sending my family love and prayers. We are very grateful, and I feel all of their love. I just want to tell everyone how much their support means to me, including you. I know that this is the first time I talked to you, but you took the time to talk to me, and I appreciate that. I am innocent, and I've been sitting here this whole time, and nobody seems to believe me, and I don't know how to prove my innocence. I don't have hundreds of thousands of dollars to get the best lawyer. I don't, so I can't do like other people do. So here I am talking to you, thanking you for your time.
Before we conclude this interview, is there anything that you would like to end with?
The awful thing is, the person that killed Juli Busken is still out there, and there's no one looking for the real killer. Everyone thinks it's me. It's an awful feeling when you know you're innocent and no one backs you up. It's traumatic. I don't understand how just because I'm I don't come from a rich family. This type of like lawyers and judges ruling and doing what they want, I guess this is acceptable to everyone in law and the community. Because nobody, even at my trial, nobody like, hey, that's not right. Hey, no, that's not right. You know, I was tried in handcuffs and shackles for no reason. Not one person said, hey, take them handcuffs off of him. This is a trial. Not one person. Not one person looked up at that jury and said, hey, that's a brown kid. Why is there not a jury, any members of his peers up there? Should not have been tried by my peers? Doesn't that mean like the same color, the same race as me? From the same ethnic background? I mean, if I was black, they'd be screaming it off the top of their lungs. There wasn't a black person on the jury. So what's the difference? And I do want to end with saying that my heart goes out to the Buskens. I can't even imagine losing a child like they did. I've lost 3 children myself, and it's awful. But how they lost theirs, I feel for them. My heart aches for them. But they need to know that I'm innocent, and the whole world needs to know that I'm innocent. Thank you for your time.
Unforbidden
Truth.
Unforbidden
Truth.
Podcast.
Unforbidden
Truth.
Podcast.
You've reached the end of our episode. All suspects are innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. Catch more next time on the Sirens Podcast.